Love, so in love, and lust, so very much in lust, Mary Wiseman was with Conte Galenos, and confused, depressed, sometimes anxious, but never so much as the day he said goodbye. For weeks she'd suffered the pain of separation, struggling to push his image from her mind. But everywhere she went, she could see his blonde hair framing his face, his blue eyes penetrating hers, his silhouette imbuing the very air with his seductive scent. At night, she dreamed of his lean, muscular body, his talented hands invigorating every sex nerve in her body. Awake, she avoided him, keeping to places where he couldn't find her. Now he'd tracked her down. His hair damp from May rain, he was standing for real in the cramped living space of her newly rented attic apartment. God, how she wanted and hated him. Had he changed his mind? Was he taking her with him to France? No, not at all. Instead, he was explaining for the far too manyth time about cultural differences in arranged marriages. It can't work between us, Bunny. My father will decide whom I marry. Probably a European woman, one closer to my culture and background. Culture smulcher. She didn't want to hear his reasons or his goodbyes. Once he'd walked out the door, she removed an ice tray from the freezer, numbed both wrists, slashed one down to an artery, and then started on the other before she passed out. Fortunately, Conte had forgotten his umbrella. He came back to find her bleeding all over the bathroom tiles, called an ambulance, then went home to pack for his trip, shaking his head all the way. Bunny, 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 why do you have to be so sensitive? The hospital room where Mary woke up gave Bleak an entirely new perspective, from the bare and gray walls to the bars on the window. At first she was groggy from the Valium an emergency room nurse had given her. By the second day, however, her spunk had returned enough for anger to surface. That day, her assigned therapist, Dr. Fu, gave her two options. Strange as it may seem, young lady, trying to kill yourself is illegal. You can either sign yourself in for treatment, or I can hold you for 5 days while I get a judge to commit you. Commit? Hadn't they punished her enough? Wasn't she still breathing? No way she was signing her freedom over to a place that insisted she live. That gives you 5 days to prepare your case. I want to go home. Besides, I have a job. Bills must be paid. Dr. Fu, a pale, balding man, to Mary's thinking a short, thin ghost in a long white coat, sat near her bedside as he explained that her therapy couldn't begin until he had the official commitment papers in hand. This meant that she'd be kept in her room, restrained and alone, until she could be evaluated for a hall pass. Also, I'm required by law to inform you that you'll be observed. He gestured to the mirror on one wall. It's two-way. Mary didn't want to be tied or alone. She'd suffered sufficient loneliness for a lifetime. But could she trust a doctor she'd just met? When you need to use the toilet, Dr. Fu continued, buzz the nurse and she'll untie you. Then she'll unlock the bathroom door. Mary craned her neck to look at the foreboding gray metal door. Why lock it? She couldn't reach the handle with her arms tied. Before she could ask, Dr. Fu stood up and answered her question. You share it with a patient in the next room. 2 weeks ago, she smashed a glass and tried to attack the last woman occupying your bed. He added that Mary would be watched in the bathroom, allowed no privacy until she'd earned what he called trust points. Do you think I'm going to drown myself in the toilet? Stranger things have happened. He turned and left the room. Mary tugged at the cloth and metal restraints on her arms. What if the call button fell on the floor and she ended up peeing in her bed? After due consideration, she decided to sign herself in. If she could sign in, she could surely sign out. If a court committed her, who knew what it might take to get out? It was the Ann Arbor 60s. A fresh Michigan spring was blooming, marijuana smoke swirling. Life's energy didn't stop just because one sad girl had tried to die. That same force tugged Mary onward. She endured the parental visit from Illinois, during which her mother, Lizzie, threw an hysterical fit. How dare you worry me to ruins, disappearing for months, now trying to kill yourself? Is your sole purpose to make my life miserable? Once her mother was gone, Mary sat silent, her face flushed, her eyes staring downward as she waited for Dr. Fu to add his disapproval. It seems your mother has a habit of acting like a self-centered child. We can't raise her all over again, but I can help you better cope with her tantrums. Gee. Someone was on her side for a change. Mary took the Rorschach test, giving every ink blot due consideration. In one, she saw herself as a butterfly, rats ripping her wings off as she clung to a silent golden bell. She took a personality test, for which she had trouble deciding on answers because none of them fit. In the end, she was certain that she'd flunked, but Dr. Fu explained that there was no passing or failing. The purpose of the test was to help him figure out how he could best help her. That meant opening old emotional wounds and letting them heal again. The healing part sounded great, but the opening part hurt. Mary told Dr. Fu about her 8 stepfathers. She told him about her real father, how her mother had refused to allow her to have any relationship with him. She told him how lonely her life had been, her mother chasing away any possible friends, Lizzie's main attention directed to the men she married. Rehashing her childhood and teens eventually became so tiring and tedious that Mary wanted a break. A month after signing herself in, she escaped during a group walk to seek out her hippie friends and smoke a joint. The walk leader that day was a gangly botany buff. She liked to lead the group through the campus, pointing out shrubs, plants, and trees, their classification, type of leaf, fruit-bearing or not, on and on with great enthusiasm. Her enthusiasm for her speeches, however, tended to divert her attention away from the group. Everyone knew that if they wanted some time off from the institution, this was the best walk to skip from, which is precisely what Mary did. While the group leader elucidated the various qualities of a tall evergreen tree, Mary slipped into the front of the undergraduate library, deftly exited out a side door, and ran all the way to Madison Street. She was out of breath and still a bit dazed by her morning meds when she stopped running. Even in her disoriented condition, the hippie house was easy to spot, lavender with yellow trim. Mary hesitated at the front door. She started to knock, then decided no. For weeks she'd walked in as if she lived there. Why knock now? She pushed the door open to find the unkempt living room empty except for a familiar overstuffed burgundy armchair and its companion green couch. She walked across the room to the base of the staircase where huge feathery ferns had always towered from clay pots. This afternoon the ferns were gone and the pots were filled with nothing but dirt. Not until today did Mary notice the grow light extending from the ceiling, perhaps because the tall plants had prevented her from seeing it. So that's why this corner had always been so bright. How silly of her not to have realized before. The plants had been marijuana. She climbed the stairs to the second floor and stopped to glance toward Michael's room. He was the resident artist. A slender, fair-haired girl was sitting on his bed. The long blonde strands surrounding her pale, freckled face created the impression of a wraith from another world, perhaps a place where gravity wasn't so strong and she could float in the air. The wraith was poking an embroidery needle in and out of a worn pair of blue jeans, forming the pattern of what looked to be a horse with wings. Mary started to walk past the room. When she had just reached the other side of the door, she heard a gentle voice calling her back. "Gretchen's upstairs sampling the new harvest. I'll join you soon, but first take a few steps back and let me see your face." Mary's heart hesitated. The girl in the bed seemed to know her, yet they'd never met. Why would she want to see her face? Then she realized that the blonde girl must be Vicky, Michael's girlfriend, the psychic Gretchen had told her about. Mary stepped back a pace and peeked into the room. "Vicky?" Otherworldly, pale blue eyes looked up from the embroidery. "We're relieved you didn't die." Vicky's voice was soft, yet held a reassuring, firm quality that gave her words weight. "I have a present for you once I've finished these last few stitches." Vicky lowered her head and continued her project. "Go ahead. I'll be up soon." Mary walked to a familiar rose-flowered door, looking at my time here, opened it and climbed the narrow stairs beyond up to a cozy, soundproof attic where she'd spent many a psychedelic evening. Thankfully, Gretchen was the only person present, no new people to face. As usual, Gretchen was wearing a dress made from an Indian print bedspread, today's color blue. 2 thick, dark blonde braids dangled on either side of her chubby face. She was leaning back on a huge orange and green cushion, her eyes closed, her fingertips barely managing to keep a joint from falling to the floor. Without opening her eyes, she reached her arm forward, offering the joint to Mary, who took a deep hit. A few moments later, Mary was sitting on her floor, her own oversized pillow cushioning her back. This was the wonder of hippies. She didn't have to say hello or goodbye. There were no empty salutes like, "How are you?" from persons who didn't care. She could simply be and not worry about who or what she was being. Mary took another hit, held it deep, silently whistled out a barely visible smoke stream, then passed the joint back to Gretchen. She was floating in her own world. No Dr. Fu, no raw emotions, Janis Joplin belting about freedom and nothing left to lose when she sensed someone kneeling next to her. That someone placed a small, cool object on her palm. Mary opened her eyes to find Vicky smiling downward. "You seem to be healing well." She knelt to cradle Mary's scarred wrist between her palms. "I'm glad he didn't hurt you permanently." Vicky's blue eyes shimmered sympathy. Men can be insensitive. "At least he called an ambulance. My landlady told me he forgot his umbrella. If he hadn't, I'd probably be dead." Mary turned over the other hand to see what Vicky had put there. A small rose bottle about 3 inches high with silver swirls inlaid. The bottle had a rounded stopper, also silver and rose. Mary set the bottle on your lap. I'm not much of a perfume person. It's for wishing. Vicky sat back on her heels. Actually, wishing's not the right word. Janis Joplin was wailing about her broken heart now. Both women stopped to listen. Finally, the song ended. Karma. Vicky reached out and turned the stereo down. You know, like in the Beatles song, Instant Karma's Gonna Get You. Never heard it, Mary said. It's not written yet, but it will be by John once they break up. Will be? Who's John breaking up with? Mary studied the larger freckles on Vicky's left cheek. If she connected them just right, they'd form the constellation Orion. You have to get back to the hospital soon, Vicky said. The walk monitor will be looking for you. So let me tell you how to use the bottle before time's gone. Gretchen passed Mary a fresh joint, and she took another hit. Do you believe in karma? Mary didn't answer. She was wondering if she was stoned enough for her eyes to be doing that hazel thing she liked to watch in the mirror, the green speckles dilating and contracting in rhythm with her pupils. When she started looking around for a mirror, Vicky put her hands on both shoulders and turned Mary back facing her. I know you're really stoned, but please try to listen. This bottle could be of use to you. Mary nodded slowly up and down. Basically, karma means that if you create a mess, you get a mess back. If you do good, the same. Good comes back. Vicky let go of Mary's shoulders, took the bottle from her hand, and held it up to candlelight. As the glow through the rose glass formed patterned shadows on the wall, Mary wondered if those shapes were some kind of ancient symbols used by witches. But karma can take lifetimes, Vicky said. This tiny bottle can give you instant karma. Some might call it revenge. It's a great way to learn life's lessons. She gave the bottle back. And I'll stop there so someone else will have time.